So just how accurate are traditional peep sights or aperture sights compared to a modern scope? Well, today we're going to find out. We've got a target set up at 100 yards, and we've got this old FN Supreme here in 30-06. And this rifle, when I purchased it, it came with a Williams peep sight. So a quality peep sight here. And I'm going to make some changes to it. I talked about it in a previous video. I'm going to do a lot to this rifle. That's going to be the big project for the next month or two or three or however long. But I'm a firm believer in any time you get a new to you rifle, before you go making changes, you need to try it out and see where it's at. How else are you going to know if you made things better or worse? And in this case, how often do you get the chance to try an old peep sight like this? So I figured before we start making changes, I want to see exactly what it's doing as is before I change a thing on it. And this is the perfect time to just see, okay, what kind of accuracy can we get with this peep sight compared to a scope? And after I shoot a couple groups with this peep sight, I'm going to mount a scope on here, and we're going to try it with the scope and then just compare results. So let's see if we can just get this one on paper. See a hole in it? Right hand target.
Looks like it's dead center if I ain't mistaken.
Damn if it ain't. And with that bore sight shot out of the way, we're gonna shoot a group of 4 now, and these are just hand loads are through together. I haven't done any load testing for this rifle, so I'm not expecting great accuracy. I just want to see what kind of groups I get out of this 4-shot group, and then we're going to put the scope on here and same rounds and compare groups. So let's see what we get. Now let's slap the scope on here.
He looks bad. You can tell it. He looks. He's aging. He's lost a lot of weight. Yeah, I mean, he's presumably.
Now let's try our bore sight shot with the scope on here, see if we get on paper, and then see what kind of group we can get out of this.
Hey, old surplus. Well, not none of that.
I thought we'd come in here to discuss those shot groups now because I just wanted to get in out of the cold. It was miserable out there. Okay, now for the shot groups. With the aperture sight, 4-shot group, 100 yards, and this was essentially a generic load. It's the equivalent of factory ammo. I just loaded some bullets, so no load testing in this rifle at all. And 4-shot group, 100 yards, it measured 2 inches, 850 thousandths. pretty decent. With the scope, and this is a Burris E1, 4.5 to 14, and this is not what I'm going to hunt with, but I love this scope for load testing. So with this scope, same ammo, 4-shot group, 100 yards. It measured exactly 1 inch less. This one was 1 inch, 850 thousandths. And keep in mind, those were not ideal conditions. Not in the least. That particular range has some really high berms on the sides, and that helps with sound, so it's not disturbing people that, you know, live with however far from the range. But it also helps a lot with, you know, crosswinds not affecting your accuracy. The problem was, it wasn't the wind affecting the bullet, it was the wind affecting the target. Those targets were flapping like a flag in the wind out there. And at that particular range, at the 100-yard and 50-yard mark, they have chicken wire strung up across the range, and then you just pin the target, you know, to the chicken wire. And that's a great setup when it's not windy. It was windy. And the big difference between the scope and the aperture sights, with the scope, I could see the target moving. So I could time my shot, you know, so that it was, you know, I could wait till it was relatively stable and not moving. With the aperture sight, I couldn't see the small movements. I could see the really big sudden gusts, but you know, small movements I couldn't. So I would love to shoot that again in ideal conditions, just to see if my group shrunk down with the aperture sight, and my guess is it would a lot. But hey, those were the conditions we had, and you know, and there were a lot more people there than I was expecting given the conditions. So, you know, kind of noisy and chaotic around me too while I was shooting. But you know, that's the range. And with those conditions, with that aperture sight, I still got 2 inches, 850 thousandths. So it was under 3 MOA. That's 200-yard deer rifle. I mean, seriously. 3 MOA, double that at 200 yards, you know, you're 6 inches. That's vitals of a deer all day long. So I was impressed with those aperture sights, especially given the conditions. So let's talk a little bit more about the aperture sight. This particular aperture sight, this is a vintage Williams Peep sight. Okay, this is a precision instrument here. And a lot of people don't realize just how precise aperture sights like this are. These aren't the crude just flip up Peep sights, you know, on an AR or something. These are very precise. And when you turn the screws on here, there's separate screws for windage, there's a screw for elevation. When you turn these screws, they click just like the turrets of a scope. So your adjustments are precise adjustments. For the Peep itself, the aperture, all right, this screws out. And the reason for that, you can put different size apertures in here, different size holes in the aperture. Okay, so you can go with a smaller diameter hole or a larger, and the reason for that is just like the, you know, different magnifications on a scope. A smaller diameter aperture is more precise. All right, and that for, you know, really small targets, target shooting. And small targets, long distance, you want a smaller aperture, more precision. The larger aperture, larger diameter, you get faster target acquisition, plus it lets in more light, just like lower power on a scope lets in more light. So these are precision instruments. Just so many of us aren't familiar with them now. I mean, it's a thing of the past, but it's a really good thing from the past. And they still make these. You can still buy a Williams Peep sight, brand new. And These are essentially the equivalent of a 1-power scope. A 1-power scope literally means no magnification. That's what you got here. And this right here, I would say, is better than a 1-power scope just because this is more robust. There's less to go wrong with this. It's 2 pieces. Your top part fits into your bottom, and then it's on a dovetail. So this part's dovetailed. It slides into the female section here, and then this part bolts to the side of your rifle. And rifles used to come drill and tapped for these, just like they come drill and tapped now for a scope. I mean, I don't know when most of the manufacturers quit doing that, but I mean, it wasn't that long ago. And this particular rifle's drilled and tapped on this side for the Peep sight. But most of the American rifles are drilled and tapped on this side. So if you've ever looked at a rifle and saw 2 screws right here on the side and wondered, what are those 2 screws for? Well, that's what it was for. You take the screws out, just like you would pull the screws out for a rifle that's drilled and tapped for a scope, and then your base would mount to it, and then you would put this in the dovetail. So I really think those are very, very underrated. For this particular rifle, though, as impressed as I was with the Peep sights, I am going to go with the scope on here for hunting, a 1x6 or something like that, just because of my eyesight. And I've talked about this before. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, definitely, there's no way I would take this off and put a scope on here for a brush gun. Man, that's 200 yards set up here. So with my eyesight, okay, if you've got sharp eyes, but that was a lot of fun. And even with my eyesight, I was surprised at the accuracy I got out of that, but I should have known because I've used precision Peep sights before. I'd mentioned several times in the past, I shot competitively in high school. That's what we used. And that first shot, the bore sight shot with this rifle, and I did have to make some pretty significant adjustments to this before I fired that shot. I checked, just looking down the bore, I centered the target in the center of the bore at 100 yards, and then looked through the Peep sight to see if it was on target, and it was off. So I made pretty significant adjustments, fired my 1 bore sight shot. Now that was just sheer luck hitting dead center in the target like that. Even a blind hog finds an acorn once in a while. But when I fired that shot though, and I went and got rifle with the scope on it, verified, yeah, it is dead center. My buddy Joey, he was off to the side spotting for me. For a moment there, it's just like old times back when I did shoot competitively, because that's what I expected with Peep sights. I mean, it's amazing some of the shot groups we got with a Peep sight. And this gets into some pretty deep stuff here. A lot of us today, okay, we think, for instance, when we mount a scope, okay, well, we've got to put a level on the scope and a level on the rifle. We've got to rotate the scope so that the vertical crosshair is, absolutely perpendicular to the rifle, and the horizontal crosshair is perfectly parallel to the horizon. And we think of the level as a precise instrument for precise alignment. That's how we think now. Okay, in the past, and this is something I'm just becoming really aware of and just really starting to understand myself, they thought differently than we do. Okay, and obviously not everything they did was perfect back then. There's a place for technology. But a lot of what they did was better than what we do now. They had a better understanding of things than we do now, especially mechanical systems. Okay, so me personally, I eyeball my crosshairs. I step back from the rifle, I square up the rifle, as best as I can, and then rotate the scope so that, my vertical crosshair is perpendicular to the rifle, parallel to the horizon. And I'm just doing it by eye. And a lot of people, oh, you can't do that. That's not precise. What is precise? It's extremely precise because I'm stepping back and I'm creating some distance between me and the crosshair. Just like the sight radius on your sights, the Peep sights are always mounted far back on the receiver versus a standard sight that's often mounted on the barrel. Well, that's a longer sight radius. That distance gives you more precision. And don't ever underestimate the inherent precision that's built within you. Visually, we can recognize a lot of things, especially when it comes to symmetry. And that's what we're doing with a Peep sight. Okay, we're putting something dead center in the center of a circle, and our eyes are extremely sharp when it comes to that. And with that level that you're putting on your scope, okay, and again, this is how we think now. Now we don't trust ourselves. We don't trust our innate abilities. And I think that's because we don't do things like this enough to realize how precise our senses are. So therefore, we want to rely on a device. But that level, that bubble level that you're putting on here, you're still visually aligning the level. You're aligning the bubble in between two marks. That's no more accurate than me visually aligning the crosshair. It's still by sight. If you want precision with the level, you need to go get a precision level. And they actually make precision levels. They're for aligning very specialized, very precise equipment. Okay, you can breathe on a precision level and the bubble just goes off the scales. I mean, they are precise. That's what you would need to get the level of precision that most of you think you're getting with just a standard, whatever level for setting a scope. And then on top of the fact that's not even needed, it's no more precise than, just visually looking. And we don't trust ourselves. That's why you use that level that isn't any more precise. In addition, it's pointless. Who said the crosshairs in the scope were perpendicular to the turrets? You just assume they are. What are the manufacturer's tolerances for that? Do they have a tolerance? They're not perfect, I promise you. I promise you there's a tolerance, and I can't even say what that is or if they even check it, but it's not perfect. Nothing is. Okay, that's just, anything we measure is going to be imperfect at some point if you get precise enough in your measurement. Okay, so again, when you put that level on there that you trust more than yourself, you're still eyeballing it. So, and you're putting it on a turret. There's nothing anywhere that says the crosshair and the scope is going to be perpendicular to the turret. Just something to think about there, and that's what I mean by people thought differently back then. Back then, they would look at us using that level and they would just shake their heads. They understood mechanical things better than we do now. That's why, the M98 Action was invented in 1898, and the Model 94 and 1894 and all the great rifles. They understood mechanical systems. They would laugh at us now. And I'm not even going to get started on absolute and relative dimensioning. We'll just save that one for another time. But learn to trust yourself and your own senses on some of this stuff, and it'll surprise you. And learn to understand how this works, like with the sight radius, like backing off on your rifle, and you can still see those crosshairs even at a distance. You can't see through the scope because it's too far away from your eye, but you can see the crosshairs. And once you start getting that distance, then you can really make some precise adjustments with your eyeball. So we accomplished our goal today. That is basically what it comes down to, which is to try out this rifle before I make any changes, just to see where I'm at, to use that Williams Peep sight while it was on here. And again, how often do you get to shoot a vintage Peep sight? So, I got to try it out. I got to see where it's at. I got to see where it's at with the Peep sight, and I got to see where it's at with the scope before I do any modifications, bedding, load testing, or anything. And truthfully, for a hunting rifle, there's no need to do anything. I'm going to play with it and do some stuff just because it's fun to do that type stuff. There's really nothing to do here, though, as far as practical purposes and terms and so forth. But we're going to do it anyway. And we know where it's at. So that was the main goal for today. And also, for those of you that have been following along with the channel, you know I'm working on the 1903 A3 Springfield also. We tried it out at the range just for the same reason, just to see exactly where this is at before we go modifying it. So real quick, here's the 4-shot group from it. And the 4-shot group at 100 yards from this rifle, as is, just a generic load, again, no load testing at all on it, was 1 inch, 640 thousandths. So just over 1.5 inches. And that's where we're starting at on this one. And just like with the FN, I was very pleased with that. I can see that both these rifles have a lot of potential. And something I got out of the shot groups also, with the FN, I noticed it was stringing to the right. When I fired the 4-shot group with the scope, the shots were steadily going right. Wind could have been affecting it, but I don't think it was. I think it was sheltered enough from the wind that it's just stringing. With this rifle's, the barrel and stock are not bedded. The barrel's not free floated. So I think that's what we had going on there. The barrel just heating up, and I think that's where that movement was coming from. And on the 03A3, 1.6 inches, I think that was a pretty solid group. 4-shot group, 100 yards. Done absolutely nothing to it, no load testing or anything, just stock out of, some loads I threw together. I'm glad to know that's where it's at, because if that's where it's at, as we start on these projects, setting up these rifles, it should theoretically get better if I don't mess things up. Hey, we'll find out shortly. And if it just gets better, I can't wait to see where it ends up at. If you enjoyed any of this, give the video a thumbs up. Let YouTube know you like shooting and hunting videos. And I have no idea what we're doing next week. Springtime, spring weather, who knows? But if you want to find out, hit the subscribe button and notification bell. God bless, and have a wonderful Easter weekend.